Hello mates, welcome back. The following is a conversation about geothermal energy, top to bottom as it currently stands. I cannot think of a more exciting industry at the moment than geothermal, especially the prospect of when it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. As you'll hear in this conversation with Patrick Hanson, who is the Director of Sales and Marketing at JRG Energy Consultants, the type of energy potential that lays beneath our feet right now at about 15 kilometers plus deep is enough green, mean, renewable energy, zero carbon emissions, continually hot to run the entire planet. So that's the hyperbolic promise of geothermal energy. All we have to do is get over a few hiccups of engineering to drill that deep. But can you think of a more exciting industry than that? Put yourselves in the shoes of one of the early oil barons when they had just discovered that below our feet, 5 to 6 kilometers deep, there was this slick black material that was going to completely revolutionize the way that people consumed energy throughout the entire world. I feel like there are certain individuals out there right now tempting that exact same fate. If they can just dig 15 kilometers or a little bit further down and harness the 400, 500 Celsius degree rock that is that far deep and convert it into electricity up at the top, the type of uncapped potential that would release is extremely thrilling and very exciting. So I wanted to speak with Patrick about this because there probably isn't a more qualified expert to give the current state of the union of the geothermal industry. So Patrick has 15 years of marketing, brand management, communications, and sales enablement experience with over 13 years specific to the geothermal industry, which, as you'll see throughout the conversation, Patrick emphasizes is really starting to heat up now. This includes 5 years working in Houston with Scientific Drilling International, where Patrick led all geothermal marketing and oversaw global geothermal business development strategy for an oil and gas supplier. Patrick has spent his entire career helping energy service companies redefine their brand and strengthen strategic customer relationships within the energy sector while positioning and promoting geothermal at every given and possible opportunity. So in this podcast with Patrick Hanson, you can expect to hear about some of the following, but really a lot more as well. The promise of geothermal energy, the sort of venture capital and investment money that is going into geothermal energy, where geographically around the world are the businesses and the hotspots and the shallowest rock, and all of the geographical questions of geothermal energy. What is the low-hanging fruit in geothermal energy at the moment? What does megawatts at scale look like? What does actually converting this hot rock beneath our feet into a consumable electricity look like? All the rest. So it is a top to bottom. It is an introduction. We speak about a lot of companies in the channel. I would encourage you to follow up on them if you are interested in this. But as well, I just want to make a general appeal to anyone out there. If you are working in geothermal or somehow interested in it, I would absolutely be thrilled to hear from you. I'm really trying to make something happen on what feels like this huge industry of potential that most of the world was completely blind to. So very exciting. And with no further ado, here is the amazing Patrick Hanson. Mr. Hanson, thank you so much for joining me on this lovely Seattle afternoon and Stockholm evening.
Thank you, Ryan.
Like I said before off air, we're going to kick right off into it. And so I would just ask you off the top to outline the promise of geothermal energy should we manage to dig 15 kilometers and deeper.
That's a great kickoff question. So I guess to start, geothermal is my preferred renewable, if you couldn't tell from my background. And I believe wholeheartedly that it is the solution to our energy crisis. It is the solution to our desire to become more energy efficient, more energy dependent, and to solve or at least aid in the solution to climate action in response to climate change. The prospect of geothermal, the deeper we drill, the hotter we're going to get, the more powerful those respective wells are going to be, which in turn generates a significant amount of energy for that respective region.
So more powerful. Give us some flavor for what that might look like. Terawatts, how it might impact the economy. Like, what's the promise of geothermal? Can it actually solve the energy problem, the renewable energy problem?
I'd like to think so, and there's enough untapped potential to where it can worldwide. The There's a few challenges that everyone in our industry face on a regular basis, and that is it is capital intensive to drill, to obtain that resource, comparatively to finding a sunny hill or a windy ravine and throwing up some solar panels or some wind turbines, and you've got a pretty confident um, project there that can be bankrolled, where geothermal requires a bit more front end research, exploration to then confirm that you can then obtain that resource by drilling into it. And there's times even today that you can drill a dry well, which is a black eye, to be honest, because there's millions of dollars that go down to these wells, and if you're not getting the resource you're intending to get, then that's a sunk cost. That being said, a successful drilling campaign anywhere in the world where it's commercially viable can generate megawatts for 30 to 50 years, depending on how you manage the resource and reservoir. Um, Again, the deeper you go, the more powerful we're talking. There's wells around this world, probably a dozen or so that are in the 25 to 50 megawatts per well. And if you've ever been around that, the ground is rattling. It is that powerful. The wells are shaking. They're that powerful. I mean, geothermal steam is something to see in person. The power beneath our feet is awe-inspiring, and it gives you that much more confidence to go after and develop it worldwide. Now, there is a caveat to geothermal when you think of obtaining that resource and then selling it or generating power. Unlike oil and gas, you can't barrel it up and ship it overseas. It is largely where you're drilling. The power plant can't be too far from that drilling site, and the power you want to sell needs to be regionally local, for lack of a better term. And so the commercially viable geothermal development worldwide today is largely around the Pacific Ring of Fire and any major tectonic or seismic activity. And largely that's because where there's volcanoes, there's heat closer to the surface. Where there's tectonic activity, there's fissures and cracks and fractures that allow that heat and that resource to be closer to the surface. And closer to the surface equals shallower drilling, faster drilling, more affordable drilling projects. Now, the Earth is hot at its core, so you can technically drill anywhere in the world if you go deep enough to obtain that resource. But then it gets to be less and less commercially viable because you can only sell geothermal power for a certain dollar per kilo or a certain cents per kilowatt hour. And so it becomes a financial game after that. So when you're talking about the commercial development of geothermal, a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been explored. So we're talking the Western US, Central and South America. We're talking New Zealand, Indonesia, Philippines, Japan, Iceland. Any island nation was created at one time based on a volcanic or tectonic happening, and so it's largely built on top of a geothermal hotspot, no pun intended. And then you look at Eastern Africa and up through Europe, Italy, Turkey, Germany, where there's power online. That is where, to date, the commercially viable geothermal power is largely produced. Again, there's more technologies coming out today than there have ever been. There's more attention on geothermal because it is the most logical transition from all these oil and gas experts because it's roughly the same technology, roughly the same engineering, roughly the same geology. You're just drilling for hot water or steam rather than oil, essentially. So it's a logical landing spot for my oil and gas brothers and sisters that are tired of losing their job every 4 years when the price of oil goes down to zero or to 20 or $30. So there was a lot of a shift in the industry. We call it the pivot. The oil and gas sector is pivoted towards geothermal, and you're seeing that with the majors investing in geothermal startups. You're seeing that in regions such as Texas, stereotypical oil and gas state in the U.S., embracing geothermal, looking for the hotter regions where those oil and gas wells have been drilled, so they know there's temperature, and they're going after geothermal in these parts of the country. But you started this question off with, can you drill deep enough, and what's that power? And there are studies to do supercritical geothermal drilling. There are a few wells around the world, in Iceland specifically, where they literally hit magma, and that is really exciting. It's I don't know enough about the details of those respective projects to speak in with any sort of confirmation, but essentially it's feasible. We have the technology to drill there. The question is, what is the longevity of the integrity of the well? How long can the technology that we require to develop that heat withstand the supercritical temperatures of that resource? Um, so that's a long-winded answer that I may or may not have fully answered for you, but I believe that the potential is enormous. There's 16,000 plus megawatts online worldwide right now. And that number is hopefully going to double in the next 10 years, because there is enormous potential in the existing regions I just outlined. Indonesia specifically, the Philippines specifically, even in the US, East Africa, Turkey. But then all of the new technologies, all the new startups that we're seeing being invested in, they're going after the non-conventional geothermal, either the supercriticals or unconventional methods of obtaining the heat, whether it's horizontal drilling or drilling with plasma. There's so many different things going on, which are super exciting, but still on the very, very front end of being commercially proven. So it's to be seen how that rocks our world, so to speak, and gets geothermal to double or triple in its development.
So, couple of details then, just so me and the audience can get a sense for what really geothermal is. Can you explain megawattage? You said the 16 megawatts online right now. Is that's geothermal energy being transformed into electricity? And what is a megawatt?
Yes,
For example,
yes.
how many
So there's
megawatts is used every day in Seattle?
that's I'm not going to try to answer that because I will definitely mess that up. But
Or
the
somewhere around the world, so we can have a sense for what a megawatt is.
yeah. So essentially, just to clarify, 16,000 megawatts online worldwide. Some single wells can produce up to 50 megawatts, maybe 60, and some are in the 2 to 3 to 5 megawatts per well. And so you can look at those economics. It takes a couple $1 million to drill those wells, to produce those megawatts. Obviously, the more powerful the well per well, the better the economics of the project. Now, when you look at how much can a megawatt power, um, all of my engineers will probably correct me on this, but essentially, it's roughly 1 megawatt of power can generate enough electricity to meet roughly 160, 165 homes in America, based on um, a quick calculation. Um, or you can extrapolate that 100 megawatts can power 16,000, give or take, homes, based on the average energy consumption in America. So you can take that and extrapolate that to 16,000 megawatts and what that can power. Now, again, it's not, as I said, 16,000 megawatts is spread out around the world. So we're talking 300 here, 1,000 there, 25 here, 10 somewhere else. And so that then powers certain size communities or certain direct consumption for operations. So it could be more that a mining operation is looking to offset their consumption by leveraging the heat and the geothermal resource within their mining operations. And the great
Yeah,
example
yeah.
there is in Papua New Guinea, the Lahir gold mine. They were drilling some prospecting wells for their mining operations and discovered geothermal pretty much by accident. And now they're saving millions of dollars over the course of their project in power consumption. So they're not importing diesel or fossil fuels to produce their mining operations. So geothermal is can be widely found and used in a number of different applications.
You mentioned the Pacific Rim of Fire. Can you just explain geographically where that is?
Sure. So if you look at the map, it's essentially a perimeter around the Pacific Ocean. So we start the western United States, western, central, and South America, up through New Zealand, um, Indonesia, Philippines,
Cool. Cool.
Japan, and
And
then
and
again,
these and this is where its most shallow geothermal is accessible. Everywhere else, you have to go a couple kilometers deeper if you want to get the big megawatts.
roughly, yeah. So when you look at a global power plant map for geothermal, you're going to see a lot of red dots around the ring of fire, and then the next kind of region is major tectonic activity that may not be volcanic, but is plates shifting, which essentially opens up access to that same kind of heat, and that's most prevalent in the Eastern African Rift. So we're talking Kenya, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Rwanda. Those countries are making a significant push to become energy independent and to leverage their clean energy at their feet, and then up through Turkey, Italy, etc.
This might be an unfair question again, but 16,000 megawatts currently being achieved through geothermal. Can you compare that to what we're extracting from solar and wind, if you know globally how much they're producing? Just so we can create a pie chart of where our energy comes.
That's a great question. The amount of solar megawatts and wind megawatts and even hydro for that matter are significantly larger than what we have online with the geothermal, and that's, I mean, we're talking about in the U.S. alone, 121 gigawatts of solar capacity is installed nationwide, and that just dwarfs what is available in geothermal. And that's and again, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head for wind, but I mean, we're talking. It's not an apples to apples comparison. The challenge with solar and wind, and I will be choosing my words carefully because I'm not a solar or wind expert, but I'm a renewable passionate about renewables. Is that the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and that's kind of a cliche these days because energy storage is rapidly advancing. But until energy storage is proven to be cost effective and mass produced worldwide, wherever there's solar or wind, those utilities, depending on solar and wind, have to have intermittent backup power that largely defaults to less climate friendly
Oil.
options.
Yeah. And I mean, geothermal could also totally complement the energy storage question as well, couldn't it? The battery.
Theoretically,
Yeah.
theoretically, yes. And the nice thing about geothermal is even though it's more capital intensive and more risky to develop on the front end, when you have a well online, it's online 24/7, and we call
Amazing.
that baseload. So baseload capacity is geothermal's best claim to fame. It's what keeps people coming back because there's so much potential, and once it's on, it's always on.
So the thing that took me onto geothermal was an interview with Robert Friedland on Eric Townsend's Smarter Markets podcast. Truly, like I started with, the promise of geothermal. He really did come out guns blazing, full sales pitch. This can 100% solve the renewable energy problem. The question is just drilling a little bit deeper. So if we're talking about 16,000 megawatts being online now, with every kilometer further you get, you have a step function increase of output, more or less, not exactly. But basically, if you can go 15, 20 kilometers down, you can extract gigawatts and gigawatts and gigawatts, like you said, 24/7 baseload for 50 years, 100 years, whatever it is. So can you fill in the gaps there? How much is he over-promising? I know that you say that you fully believe that it's possible, but it's this engineering feat that needs to be overcome to realize that. Is it simply a case of improving drilling technology, or is there more to it to get deeper?
There's a lot more.
Okay.
The technology side, the capacity to handle that power, um, is getting there. But geothermal, even though if you drill deep enough, is theoretically anywhere, you're still drilling into indigenous people's communities. You're still drilling into city structures. They're it would be theoretically invasive to people that otherwise aren't on board with having a massive drilling rig and drilling infrastructure be installed in their untouched, forest lands. We see that a lot in Latin America. Chile, for example, has enormous geothermal potential, enormous
Hmm.
potential. Much of that power is at the very top of the mountain ranges. Most of the community that would benefit from the power lives at sea level.
Mm.
And so not only do you have to drill in um, significantly more challenging environments such as snow, 20 feet of snow, mostly year round, you're
Wow.
also then having to install transmission lines all the way down the the mountain range and largely through indigenous people's communities that have
Yeah.
no interest in seeing that. Now, that is a specific example of a region that has enormous potential, that has seen that sort of social license to operate hurdle and the economics of getting the power from the source to the end user. In other places, it is in Japan, for example. They are currently working with the government to drill either directionally or to obtain access to some of the national forests and national parks, which are quote unquote sacred and you can't touch. But an enormous amount of geothermal potential is beneath those regions. And so, yes, you can drill deeper to then 10x the power. Yes, the technology is getting very close to being able to do that, to not only drill that deep, but to drill there deep faster, which then saves money. But really, it's access. It's the incentive to be able to sell that power to a utility that could check that renewable portfolio standard by getting solar and wind. So some of the utilities and some of the governments that are forced to or encouraged to purchase cleaner energy, it's more of a how can I do that by checking the boxes I need to check most cost effectively. That's where geothermal has a bit of a challenge, not impossible, and you see that every day being developed worldwide, especially now. But the deeper you drill, the more expensive it is, and the less economic it will be to then sell those kilowatts to the grid for those end users to use. And so
Mm.
there's just to kind of sum up, yes, there is that enormous, powerful potential. And if I could make that sales pitch at the top of the mountain, I would, and I do often. But the commercially viable projects are where they are. And the amazing technologies that are being developed to do this drilling, deeper drilling, faster drilling, cheaper drilling, are on the front end of development. And if not, or if they are being commercially proven right now, are still very um, new in terms of it hasn't been widespread, it hasn't been utilized in Indonesia or in the Northern California or places where it's conventional geothermal drilling. So there's a lot of wait and see, a lot of excitement, a lot of momentum, and enormous potential. But it's a juggling act.
Yeah, and it does seem like that is a kind of immovable barrier. The proximity from where it's drilled to where it's consumed. If it is the case that you have to drill close to where it's consumed, then that does make it immediately far less attractive of a prospect than does, say, oil, which, like you said, you can just barrel and ship wherever you want for it to be locally consumed.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a good time then to introduce Quay's Energy, because Carlos Araque and what they're doing over there, I think it sounds like an ingenious, again, coming from a complete outsider, so I don't know how much of it is sales, but an ingenious solution to that problem where they just drill in existing coal plants. Since the coal plants are already there, it's essentially dead infrastructure because they're not going to be turned back on, but they're already within proximity to the towns. So what do you make of that company and Carlos and everything that they're doing? The technology for drilling. I should also mention that they are the ones trying to go 20 kilometers deep and
Yeah.
really get that super high leveraged output.
I love it. I love it, and I won't be this gray-haired conventional geothermal guy white knuckling the resistance to change and why can't we just drill more conventional work with all this untapped potential. I think what Quays is doing and what several other of their uh, quote unquote startups, new momentum, new money, new ideas are doing for our industry is fantastic, and I champion them and their accomplishments. The idea of converting existing assets such as coal plants and the land that those coal mines are essentially consuming is amazing. In fact, what we're trying to do with JRG Energy is to leverage that energy transition wave for oil and gas and for mining in general. To how can they become more energy efficient? How can they specifically consume less power by being more independent, leveraging existing assets? So essentially, it's while what I do is a people business, an engineering business, an extension of your respective technical teams. What Quaise is trying to do with the technology and the mindset to do that via coal is applauded. I think it is um, where we should be spending some time and attention.
Um, in the industry, who are the most exciting companies that you guys sort of talk about? Like, who are the Quaise competitors? Who are these startups that are experimenting with different types of drilling tech? Because if you do look at it from the very rosy spectacled view that I'm looking at it from, the type of potential is ridiculous, and I almost feel like I've stumbled across something which is like a hidden secret. Could it really be the case that if Quaise or X company drills 20 kilometers deep, they genuinely create the new wave of energy? They become the Rockefeller of the next generation. Am I too hyperbolic in the way I think about this?
No, you're not. And I think we need more people to think that way to channel that energy to further champion the word geothermal so it can be more synonymous with renewables such as solar and wind. We need this type of podcast to go mainstream. We need this type of messaging to be out there, and the Quaises and the others. Um, I can't speak definitively on who's competing against Quaise per se on drilling deeper, faster, cheaper. But the technologies of plasma drilling, of water hammers, of air hammers, of lasers. That sounds kind of space age Star Warsy, but it's really where it's going. I mean, the drilling bit technology is fascinating, and traditional geothermal is in some of the hardest granites and volcanic formations that you've ever encountered. And so it eats up these different types of drilling bits faster than you could ever imagine, especially from an oil and gas perspective. They're just mind blown that you go through multiple bits to drill a single well. And so any investment in the technology, whether it's Quaise or it's someone else, to um, to obtain and to approach drilling either faster or in a different way is welcomed. There are companies that are um, Strata Global, I believe, is doing something pretty exciting. Um, there are amazing technologies that are so ever the closed loop company that's proven projects both in Canada and in Germany. They are essentially drilling two wells and intersecting basically like this. So the technology to intersect these wells is fascinating. There's so the whole closed loop enhanced or engineered geothermal systems is something we actually haven't even started talking about here on this discussion. But essentially, it's leveraging the heat where there may not be permeability or resource, and circulating a fluid that is heated by that rock through a closed loop system, whether it's ever that's doing the intersection like this, or Green Fire Energy, and others that are exploring ways to optimize geothermal resources.
So we've got Strata, Ever, Quaise. I'd just be fascinated for my own interest to be able to look at others. Are there any others that come to mind? The experimental, the ones who are really operating at the end, where if they do hit it, they've got the leverage.
So the two other companies that come to mind are Hefe Energy and Serafi. Both companies are pushing the boundaries. Hefe is working on higher temperature drilling tools, and I can't speak in great detail about the others just because I don't want to misrepresent them from what I'm gleaning from their website or my just general insight. But a quick search on thinkgeoenergy.com is going to give you one of the greatest pulses of what's happening in geothermal worldwide
Mm.
than you could imagine. Alex Richter, the founder of Think Geo Energy, created this kind of media website with a dream to just share news, and it's exploded into one of the most sought after and reputable platforms for anything geothermal. And whether it's the advertisers on the website or it's the headlines that the companies are making via the just news generation, anything and everything you want to know about geothermal can be found on Think Geo. If I'm at all misrepresenting or misexplaining,
No, that's good. I actually emailed Richter. I wanted to have him on, um, but I didn't hear back. What about access to financing on these guys? I know Quays, I think they raised 20 million or something. It's chump change compared to what a random, automated chatbot SaaS company would get. If you think about the difference in its sort of role for humanity, but also the potential upside. Could this be a bad signal that perhaps the research behind it, backing it up, isn't as much as they say it is? Since the people giving out the money, they're totally incentivized to find these sort of cheap returns. But maybe they have a look at it and they decide that it's too risky. Is this a bad signal, or is this just more a reflection on venture capital not looking in the right direction? Yeah.
That's a great question. So financing in general for geothermal has always been considered. Um, I need to choose my words wisely here because I don't want to misrepresent the beauty of my industry. Um, Risky, and I say that because what I've alluded to previously, in that to drill a well, you are investing in the idea that your exploration studies have warranted enough of a reason to pump millions of dollars into drilling that well, with the chance that it could be a dry well. And so the people that are financing that have to hedge their bets, have to be highly selective. It requires sometimes temperature gradient wells or core wells or slim wells to be drilled to prove that the temperature is there, to prove the resource is there. So there's a lot of risk associated with proving that the resource is even there to then get the second round of financing that is a more sizable number that can actually move the needle. When you talk about investing in technology, 20 million here, 10 million there, what have you, I think it kind of goes along the same mindset. Even though it's technology and not the resource, the application and use of that technology, the proof of concept required to leverage that technology, to give the investors the confidence to pump more money into the company, is tied to proving that concept in a well that is highly risky to drill, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think the amount of money that you referenced there is minuscule comparatively to the next app or the next social platform or
Yeah.
whatever that's generating
To some
NFTs.
completely forgettable SaaS product that's going to add some
Correct.
marginal value to a giant audience.
Sorry, you'd be shocked that this energy transition wave, this pivot that we've seen over the last couple of years, has seen the most money to date ever invested in our industry, ever. Whether it's these startups like Quays, or it's oil and gas companies like Shell and Exxon and Oxy and BP investing their own money into drilling companies or development projects themselves. And this could be in the 5, 10s, 15s, hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm not quite sure. A lot of that's private. But the fact that the needle is being moved, the fact that there is money coming in that's not just Department of Energy, research money, is fascinating and encouraging to say the least. And the $20 million number that you referenced in context is pennies comparatively to that random SaaS project, but it is the first sign that that kind of money is available and that money is going into our industry. And so we're going to leverage that as much as we can. We, as in the industry, and if it's Quays or if it's Ever or if it's Criterion Energy or Greenfire or any of these companies out there that are doing something new for Fervo, and all the existing conventional leaders, We're going to leverage every dollar that's made available to us to continue developing geothermal conventionally, unconventionally, and or for these incredibly high energy consuming industries like oil and gas or mining or food processing that aren't looking to sell it to a utility but are looking to leverage it to offset their own consumption. There's no shortage of um, outlining an end use for geothermal.
Does geothermal have a bad track record on offering return on investment, or is it too young of an industry to even know?
It's That's a great question. So it's not too young of an industry technically. It's been around since the 1960s on a commercial scale, and it's been around to the beginning of days if you look
Mm.
at it more as operational or sorry direct use hot springs, agriculture and whatnot. The challenge is the time it takes from drilling that first well to putting an electron on the grid is a bit longer than the average investor wants to see that return. So there will be a return when it's a successful project. But unlike oil and gas, where you drill a well, you can literally sell that barrel of oil the next day, or it's solar or wind, where it's a theoretically a shorter installation period from start to finish with a bit less of a risk associated with it. The length of time from start to finish on a geothermal project, even though that's shortening with the incredible advancements in technologies with modular power plants and power generation systems and drilling projects and whatnot, and the size of a project. Um, the general length of time is why geothermal is seen a little riskier
Mm.
and less attractive to the average investor.
Yeah.
Um, but it also depends on who you're talking to.
It's interesting. I mean, it sounds like the risk profile is just maybe not attractive to traditional money that can look at way more variables on a run sheet to determine that a SaaS investment is going to be a much higher return on their money, a much shorter return on their money, and maybe a little bit more safe, maybe a little bit more status and signal as well, because you get to be in those circles with all the famous people, um, and perhaps the geothermal maybe just isn't sexy enough, which really does surprise me. I don't know, maybe it's just a consequence of geothermal not riding the sexy wave of solar and wind, because I completely understand your argument you said earlier about using the Chile example on top of the mountain. Yeah, it would be a terribly invasive thing to put a large commercial operation on a beautiful, idyllic mountaintop and then run electricity lines down it into the main town. But surely that's an outlier example. The majority of these wells are going to be in just forgettable places where people aren't going to be paying attention to it. And so if you take out that one small variable, geothermal is clean energy and abundant. It can easily be roped in with the solar and the wind.
Without a
Why
doubt.
did it miss the wave? Like what happened?
I think it all goes back to sort of the narrative I've been sharing about it takes a little bit longer. It does take a bit more money up front, and it does rely sometimes on government subsidies and incentives to
Yeah, but
de-risk the
so does
project.
solar and wind. They exist off government subsidies.
True, and they get a lot more because it's a numbers game. So there's 10x number of people in solar and wind as an industry,
Yeah.
and in lobby firms, etc., compared to geothermal. My background's in sales and marketing. My background's in brand management. My background is in positioning and promoting geothermal to the masses to educate them one person at a time. That's why I got into the kind of consulting business and what I've accomplished. And I've helped, at least I'd like to think I've helped uh, carry that torch with different organizations that embody that bringing sexy to geothermal, so to speak.
Mm.
And we've seen that as well in kind of the evolution of branding and messaging geothermal. So the formerly known Geothermal Resources Council of the United States was rebranded to Geothermal Rising, which is way cooler of a name. and it embodies kind of the idea that we're harnessing the heat beneath our feet. And what we've learned in that process of rebranding Geothermal Resources Council to Geothermal Rising, I say we again as an industry, I wasn't part of the agency that helped them rebrand, is that communicating the concept of solar, uh, marketing the idea of wind energy are easier to message and convey and visualize to the layman than geothermal. Oftentimes, we find ourselves, at least the conventionalists that we are, instantly explaining what geothermal is, and we all of a sudden put on our science teacher's hat or our geologist hat, and we start talking in these terms that are being glazed over when you talk
Mm,
about them to
mm,
people. And so it's how do we distill the idea of geothermal to then again become more synonymous with in renewables like solar and wind, and that is, I think, largely messaging it around harnessing the heat beneath our feet, and,
yeah.
leveraging that the earth that is hot at its core. The the outlier example that I gave you in Chile is definitely an outlier because there is a lot more untapped low hanging fruit, what have you, around the Pacific Ring of Fire, around the Eastern African Rift, that are being explored as we speak. Some of it has bottlenecked with the instability of governments and administrations changing, and you finally make you finally make progress with one administration, and it changes, and you have to start over, and oftentimes educate them from ground zero. Again, that's a gross stereotype that can be applied to some countries that have constantly changing administrations and governments. Um, and I say that because those are the people holding the purse strings. Those are the people that are incentivizing some of the state-owned operations to develop geothermal. And I'm not specifically tying that to Indonesia, but my next comment is about Indonesia, and that they literally have somewhere around 29,000 megawatts of untapped potential. And they currently have less than 2,000 developed,
At what
um,
depth?
ranging from, I'm going to just range this, but 6 to 12,000 feet. So
So without
two,
technology, we have that accessible.
yes,
Okay, cool.
yes.
Yeah.
So that's why there is the again I say this in jest, but the conventional geothermal side of the business oftentimes rolls their eyes at all of these amazing startups getting all of this funding when there's still a significant amount of untapped potential in conventional methods around the world with
Mm.
existing megawatts online. So proven infrastructure, it's just a matter of doing the work and getting that well drilled or that project developed.
Why is there so much inefficiency in this market? Because you say that right there, that Indonesia has access to 20-ish thousand megawatts with technology we already have. So it's simply a case of people organizing the capital and labor to go and extract it. Mining companies print money, not mining companies, oil drilling companies print money. Why haven't they just redistributed some of their resources and gone after these markets? Like, why is there so much inefficiency here? Or am I just being too harsh and it's just way harder than it all looks?
No, I mean a lot of us ask those same questions, maybe differently, but essentially it's why hasn't this happened? And again, I don't want to sound redundant, but I think a lot of it boils down to the fundamentals of it's not as simple as it sounds in terms of drilling a well. The technologies are there, the infrastructure is there, but there are still risk. There's still resource optimization challenges. Again, the sun shines, the wind blows. It's pretty understandable and pretty easy to maintain. Again, forgive me for the gross oversimplification. I'm not a solar or wind guy, so I don't want to offend anyone by simplifying that. But essentially, when the sun shines, the wind blows, you're generating power with minimal maintenance. Even though geothermal is clean, sustainable, renewable based on how you manage the reservoir, in many cases, Indonesia specifically, the wells are so acidic, the resource is so caustic that the multi-million dollar wells you're drilling have so much scale and corrosion buildup after just a couple years that they essentially have to re-drill that same well to open up that production again. Again, that is another finite example that can be applied largely around the world, but it is a really good example of saying that it's not drill it and walk away from it and it's going to produce through the lifespan of the reservoir. Sometimes that reservoir is nasty, for lack of a better term, and it can really eat up a well and its wellhead components, and that's just recirculating multi-millions of dollars to maintain that well or that well pad to meet that production capacity that the power plant demands, to then meet
Okay,
that power
yeah,
purchase agreement.
like
It's a
that.
cycle, right?
That makes a lot more
So
sense. Perhaps they're not the most cost efficient megawatts available. Are there big gaps in the market of very cost efficient megawatts that are available, which simply no one has gone and realized?
I don't I don't want to say no, but I can't speak definitively on that because I think with the evolution of these technologies that we've referenced, we're going to discover ways to obtain the resource more efficiently, and perhaps that resource is cleaner in some regions around the world that we haven't explored to its fullest potential yet. Um, but I think that uh, the resource, whether it's steam that you find in Northern California and parts of Italy, or it's a brine fluid, geothermal fluid that has components that eat away at the integrity of wells that need to be processed at the surface. Um, both both require significant maintenance over the lifespan of its project, which is just another hurdle and another um, element in the lifespan of a geothermal project that you can't really get around.
Did you listen to that Robert Friedland podcast that I mentioned earlier?
Parts of it, but don't quote me on it.
Okay. Just because something you were saying before about the overall brand of geothermal and perhaps where it fell short and how it could be improved. I think the way that Robert laid it out there, is as much of a call to action as I could imagine. I haven't heard, you know, equ- equally emotive language used for wind, for example, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is largely quite a boring industry, although it gets shit tons of ESG money. But yeah, I guess I just wanted to bring that up to see if you'd heard it to know really. Um,
I'm definitely
what?
going to go check it out from start to finish after this conversation, but
Yeah.
I don't
Do,
have a
do you
definitive
know if
opinion on
he's
it.
doing anything specifically? In it, he mentions a company called iPulse, and they were innovating on the drilling technology. Although when I look at their website, it hasn't been updated for about 3 years. So I assume maybe they're kind of defunct. But do you have any
I
insight
don't
into
know a
that?
lot.
No.
I
Okay.
don't know a lot about his commercial involvement.
Of the promise of geothermal, should it be realized at 15 kilometers plus depth, one of the most amazing second, third order consequences of realizing that energy potential is the geopolitical shift and the effect on overall geopolitics that you would see from it, because it would change energy dependence and it would change this idea of being reliant on other nations for energy. And there are so many great examples of why that is really bad, to rely on someone else for your foundation for society. Without energy, everything stops. So, can you comment on that and then also give a current state of the union? What are the nations that are most invested in geothermal? And I'm sorry, that's a rambling question, but take it where you will.
Okay. If geothermal can be developed at the deeper regions in this world with newer technologies, it will be a seismic shift, no pun intended, in having geothermal be more prominent, uh, having a larger seat at the table when it comes to the renewable energy mix that countries can explore, especially countries that are incredibly dependent upon importation of diesel and other fossil fuels for any sort of survival or operation. A lot of island nations come to mind when you say that. Um, the the limiting factor of conventional geothermal is that it's very regional to the ring of fire and tectonic and seismic shifts. So if we can drill deeper, we theoretically open up the doors to development worldwide. And we're not tied to Hawaii, or we're not tied to Southern California or in the mountains of Mexico. We have potential in Scotland. We have potential in, I don't know, Algeria. I mean, wherever there's surface to drill, you theoretically could find it. Now it depends on if it's heat, if it's hot rock, if it's steam, if it's a brine. I mean, all of that will be determined as studies show more evidence of proof of concept, etc. But it would literally be a game changer. We would be laughing at the times that we were talking about 16,000 megawatts online, because we'll be talking about 100,000 megawatts and gigawatts. So I hope that happens in my lifetime, to be honest, and I don't think that that's too far off. But it's not just about drilling faster and drilling deeper and then obtaining that resource. It's what infrastructure is required to channel that power. And I think that obviously you build a larger power plant, or you develop more robust pipelines, and/or more cutting edge transmission lines to optimize your grid. I mean, these are questions and topics that I am not experienced to discuss further, but a lot
so
more
important.
goes into, yeah, it goes into the holistic nature of developing more renewable energy, geothermal at a deeper depth, or solar, what have you, hydro, biomass, etc. So yes, it could shift the way we look at the world and the way we think about energy, and the way some countries are second or third world could catapult themselves into economic relevance based on energy independence and the affluence that it would provide them.
Yeah.
But that's a bit farther than I can reach right now in terms of seeing that come to realization, because we're talking about the Quays, we're talking about these other companies that are on the precipice of greatness. But what do we do with that resource once it's reached? And I think that part of the conversation, largely on the grid optimization, is something that cannot be overlooked.
Yeah.
And I know it's a huge and polarizing topic in the States here, so something to have to consider.
Yeah.
The second part of your question was which were the what? Can you repeat the second part of your question?
Yeah. What was the second part?
Something about nations.
Oh yes. That was like a current geopolitical lay of the land. You have already mentioned it many times: the Pacific Rim of Fire, Italy, Iceland, the United States, California. I think we can skip that, to be honest. It was me waffling a little bit.
Okay. I mean, essentially, so the U.S., Indonesia, and the Philippines have been the top three countries with megawatts online for many, many years. In a blink of an eye, i.e., about 10 to 15 years, Turkey and Kenya have gone from zero to top five in the world. And Mexico is in that kind of top five, top 10-ish, New Zealand and Iceland as well. And that's kind of the breadwinners in terms of leveraging the conventional geothermal that they have. And then there's many, 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 many more countries that have anywhere from 10 to 300 megawatts. Some of which, like El Salvador, Costa Rica, that's more than they need to power their countries. And others are just a blip on the radar, but have the potential to be
Wait,
much larger.
you're saying Costa Rica has available to them, with the current technology that we have, access to enough geothermal to run their country?
As well as El Salvador. Now they have a renewable mix, so it's not just geothermal, but geothermal provides a significant percentage of their total power consumption
Oh, so
mixed in with
that's
solar.
already realized. That's not potential.
Yeah, yeah,
See, that's a
it
great
is.
story. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating, and they're not largely considered. Um, um, well, they are. There are leaders within the geothermal space, but as a country, they have varying perceptions of safety and of governmental ethics, but they are prominent in the development and thought leaders when it comes to geothermal.
Sure. What are some creative solutions to the grid issue or to the distribution issue from when the energy is converted into electricity and then ultimately consumed? Apart from Quays doing it in old defunct coal plants, have you heard of any really exciting solutions to that potential problem?
When it comes to the grid, I can't, nor do I want to speak on that because it is such a conversation beyond my ability to comprehend. I know that it's inefficient, at least in the States, and there's a massive movement to optimize grid stabilization and what have you. From from creative um from a creative standpoint, I guess, thinking along the lines of what Quays is trying to do with coal, there are several companies, including my own, that are
JRG?
trying to be in JRG Energy, that are trying to be on the forefront of the energy transition, and that is educating and providing solutions to um, these energy consuming industries such as oil and gas and mining and food processing or timber or IT server farms that are just consuming amounts of energy that would blow your mind, and spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to operate, and yet they are on top of the same heat beneath our feet that some of these conventional geothermal projects are. I mean, if you look at the mining industry, many mines, not all, but many mines are there because of the product that the volcanic activity that created geothermal created these precious minerals, gold, copper, silver, what have you, and wherever, whether it's in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, in the U.S., or it's in southern Peru, there's a huge mining industry consuming an insane amount of water and electricity to operate, and they're on top of geothermal. And so I refer back to the Papua New Guinea Lahir gold mine that has is probably the best case study for geothermal development on a mine. Um, that can be replicated in many places around the world where there's a mining industry. Same with timber, same with oil and gas, maybe in different scales. But the idea to convert non-performing or non-productive assets in oil and gas into geothermal is not a pie in the sky idea. People are doing that. Now, not every oil and gas well that is being abandoned or that is not producing enough to make it economic to keep producing qualifies for co-production or for geothermal conversion, but enough do that they should be paying attention to that option, because it's not just a comparison to what is it going to cost me to plug this well and walk away, and what is it going to cost me to convert a megawatt or a kilowatt of electricity. But it's the renewable tax credits. It's the boost to your ESG status from a stakeholder's perspective. It's um, perhaps the revenue stream of power generation, or the cost savings of power generation, or the goodwill gained by producing desalinated water from the brine of an oil and gas well to a community in West Texas or in Sumatra, Indonesia. So there's so much potential, and there's companies like transitional um, transition. Oh my goodness, excuse me, 1 second. I don't want to represent them correctly. Dang it. Transitional Energy is a company that's leveraging oil and gas conversion. PetroLearn is doing some really exciting things in the U.S. Not to make PetroLearn, 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 and even JRG Energy. Again, JRG is a people business. We're engineers, project managers, consultants that help you internally, like as an extension of your respective technical team. Whereas Transitional Energy and others are providing like a more turnkey solution. Um, but it's exciting. It's exciting to see that the pivot, that the energy transition is opening the eyes to what has long been the dinosaur in the room, and the money-hungry fossil fuel industry is exploring the greener side of the business.
Honestly, you addressing all that low hanging fruit is so exciting for me to think about, because as I've been obsessing over geothermal energy, just as, something that runs in the back of your mind, I've been thinking there are all these applications. You gave this great example of the gold mine in Papua New Guinea, and then a myriad of other potential applications that it could have for tons of developments that are happening throughout the world, Sweden alone, anywhere.
Yeah.
It's so much low hanging fruit. It's so much good business that's addressable. Is this like, if I spin up a little company that's going to start installing existing technology, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I just have to, organize labor and capital. Is it really accessible, or am I again just getting a little bit ahead of myself? Is it too hyperbolic, or can you see worldwide there are so much applications for the existing geothermal tech that we have, and it's not simply the case of all of the eggs are in the bucket of hitting 15, 20 kilometer depths?
I think I think there is an opportunity for a creative startup to carve out a niche in this industry and do that, and to do that in lockstep with some of the companies we've just rattled off. JRG is doing that as well. As I said, JRG is a people business, and our sister startup company is more of a technology solution. It's very much in the detailed design phase right now, but it's leveraging, as I was mentioning, non-productive assets in oil and gas or other waste heat generating infrastructure, to capture that waste heat and to turn it into clean energy and to desalinated water. And that's a modular turnkey solution. It's similar to what some of the other companies are trying to do, but there's so much potential that if you wanted to do something, Ryan, you could, because it's a matter of talking to the right people, opening their eyes to the right problems with a solution, and that solution is leveraging that waste heat. That solution is capturing that hot water, and in any other capacity, drilling a little deeper. You already have to drill a well. Let's drill a little deeper, and you can open up these opportunities. I mean, there's no shortage of opportunity, and I honestly think that if we had this conversation a year from now or 2 years from now, it's going to look a lot different, a lot for the better, obviously.
Very, very exciting. You probably if not the best, one of the best people to ask this to, though, in terms of research, to access to research reports and general over industry knowledge. Where should I look, to do the most time efficient education in where the real opportunities are and what it actually looks like and who are the people to speak with?
Sure.
Yeah.
There's a more brand name places to look, like the World Bank and IRENA. There's a bit more of the day-to-day commercial news from Think Geoenergy, and then there's research outfits. Think Geoenergy conducts research. A startup that I have my fingertips in is in the education, outreach, and data business, Geothermal Data Services, and several others. The National Renewable Energy Lab in the U.S. produces amazing reports. If you look, you will find archives upon archives of current and historic data around geothermal that will really shape the narrative. And most of it is available, and some of it is for purchase, and you will walk away an expert on geothermal.
Nice. Because
Yeah.
it really is the case. I mean, you've spoken about. God, I'm sorry, I got a frog in my throat. But we've mostly spoken about US companies and potentially a European company. I mean, we haven't even touched on Asia, India, China, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. Like, these are the most populous places in the world that have shitloads of development going on that would 100% be eyes open to this sort of stuff. Do you have any sort of idea of, in the developing world, I suppose you did mention a lot of Latin America, but maybe in those countries I just mentioned, and perhaps other places in West Africa, do you have any idea as to what the market looks like there, whether there are people operating and stuff like that?
In Asia Pacific, there's a lot of crossover between the countries that have proven geothermal power Indonesia, Philippines, Japan, New Zealand, to name just a few, Papua New Guinea, where their neighboring countries, as you rattled off, have potential. Haven't quite built that infrastructure up for from a conventional power plant power generation standpoint, but have potential. And even if that's not mainstream, that's land developers and architectural firms that are looking to install geothermal heat pumps or other ways to, smaller power plants on scale from what we've described earlier, to then become a self-sufficient skyrise or district heating for a community.
Yeah.
Those are all absolutely on the table and are probably being explored or developed as we speak.
There must be grubby Australian paws all over the Indonesian and Papua New Guinea operations, right?
I will let you choose those words, but there are definitely Australian influence,
Yeah.
whether it's from the Australian mining sector and or from an engineering and standpoint. And not too far off ago, there was a pretty exciting geothermal industry in Australia that never quite hit it off from a conventional standpoint. And some of those companies, rather than dissolving, kind of shifted into alternatives, whether it was in Latin America, Australian-owned businesses operating in Latin America, or Australian-owned businesses operating through Asia Pac.
Yeah. I saw that. It was in, I think, near Cooper Pedy in South Australia. They promised the world and then delivered nothing, which I
Yeah, there was a
guess,
few hiccups there that Australia is a great example that there's heat. There's a lot of heat, but the permeability and the actual resource or reservoir was not as prominent or was not reached as they thought they could get. So,
interesting.
um,
So, as you know, I am editing this, so I might end up deleting this, but I thought it was a good question at the time. I'm thinking less so now, but I want to ask it anyway and see what you think.
okay.
So this line of inquiry might have a negative inflection, so don't let me bring the energy down, but if you take a step back, very high view of geothermal, say from where I'm coming at it from, zero industry expertise, literally just seen some things and gotten excited. You look at the mining drilling industries in a very superficial manner, the fact that these giant companies with reservoirs of money haven't yet transitioned into geothermal, despite the fact that they have all of the labor and knowledge and infrastructure pretty much already on their balance sheet. They don't have to go through the really hard effort of developing that all, attracting the people, X, Y, and Z. So if the promise is true and the upside of geothermal could potentially be the next oil, even more than the next oil, and there are really, really well-off companies perfectly situated to transition into it, and it's not happening, could this be a really bad signal that, in fact, geothermal is not all it's cracked up to be? The geophysicists have decided, you know what, we cannot do it at the moment, and X, Y, and Z. So it's a negative question, but it's also one that you have to ask. If the smartest physicists in the world and the most in-the-know drilling engineers in the world are saying there actually isn't potential in this, do we take them at their words, or are they wrong? What do you think?
That's a fantastic question, and I don't think it's negative. I think it's a reality check, or a calibration, if you will, not a check. So I think that we are on the front end of a shift. I've referenced Pivot several times. The state of Texas, the University of Texas, Austin, and Jamie Beard and team established Pivot 2020 and Pivot 2021 are these virtual conferences that have attracted thousands upon thousands of people in the energy transition space, in the oil and gas space, that are getting a lot of people and a lot of money to pay attention to geothermal. I think it all boils down to money, though. The price of oil, the incentives, the government subsidies, the perhaps corruption in some places around the world, et cetera, that line the pockets of people that can move the needle. So geothermal is the most logical pivot point for a lot of people in oil and gas from, as we said, engineering, technology transfer, knowledge transfer. There's there is a learning curve. It's a little bit different drilling, but theoretically it's transferable, and we're starting to see that. Why haven't we seen that in the last 100 years? That I think boils down to a little bit of dollar and cents and a little bit of a lot of lack of knowledge of what oil and gas and other industries do to the climate. So the awareness of climate change, the pressure that people are getting to be more ESG compliant, to achieve or make an effort to be net zero, or at least to make an effort to reduce emissions. All of these are compounding upon each other, and we're at that breaking point where, a year ago when the price of oil was still low, a lot of that shift was happening, was being realized with these investments from these traditional oil and gas drilling companies, from these major brand names, BP, Chevron, Shell, etc., investing in these companies, these startup companies like Quays, or development projects around the world. We were seeing that. It is to be determined over literally the next couple of months, maybe next calendar year, as oil has kind of rebounded back to its heyday, how much of that attention is slowed down or shifted back, and what sticks. Now, I believe that the pressure, the interest, the trend of climate change and climate action is actually going to overpower the dollar and cents conversation that, or side of the argument that we've seen kind of oscillate back and forth, because those investments have just been made. Those investments are being made, and they're not going to pool that money. So I believe that at least what happened over the last 24 months, it proves there's a vested interest in the global industry, from oil and gas specifically, that geothermal is something to take serious and to invest further in. And you see that even with U.S. specific Department of Energy opportunities, the geothermal technology offices that are investing 20s to hundreds of millions of dollars into projects available, grants available for development of underperforming oil and gas fields, development of newer technologies, proof of concepts that oil and gas companies are taking serious. I can't, it's too premature to say, but several have reached out to me to kind of gauge our interest in helping them with these potential applications. That just further proves that they're taking this serious. So you asked a question that could have been answered or posed a negative frame of light on geothermal. Why is it taking this long? Why are there not enough or as much of a shift or people taking geothermal serious? And there is still a significant shift that still needs to happen without even completely turning their back on the industry that they know, but to embrace the one foot in both doors, so to speak, to see the potential of geothermal with that new blood and that old money, and to see where that goes. And I honestly think if we have this conversation a year from now, we'll be talking about a lot of different success stories and even more exciting news out of Quays and Ever and all these others that we've shared.
Yeah.
And the startup that our company is investing in could be commercial by then.
It seems like you are only receiving really optimistic signals about the future of geothermal, which I know isn't a qualitative measure, but as a reality check is a brilliant sign. I think we should lean on our instincts and learn from instinctual signals more so than whatever the data might be saying. So that's really cool. If you could offer a very futile course of action, but nonetheless a fun one, could you make a prediction as to where you think geothermal is going to be in 10 years if 16,000 megawatts is online right now, in optimistic and pessimistic view? What's our wattage in 10 years? What does the field look like?
I'm known to be pretty conservative when it comes to these types of guesstimates, but I would say 10 years from now, 30,000 megawatts, so just under doubling. And a more pessimistic or even more uber conservative look would be probably 21,000. Um, just based 21 to 22,000, because we're some years we put on 200 or 300 megawatts. Some years we're putting on 800 to 1,000 megawatts, depending on these large scale projects being developed. But I think that it's a numbers game, and there's going to be more projects, even if they're smaller projects at the start, that are all going to start hitting online. There's Kenya, as I mentioned, was a rising star, but Ethiopia has just as much potential, and they are on the front end of drilling for 3 years. So there could be hundreds of megawatts coming online out of Ethiopia alone in the next 3 or 4 years, to be honest. And then that's a blueprint that a lot of countries are following. So I would say that if I was a betting man, I would be north of 25,000 megawatts in 10 years, and um, I wouldn't be doing this anymore if we were at 30,000 megawatts. If I could
I
predict
was
that.
hoping you were going to say 100,000, couple of gigawatts. But that's okay. I
Well,
mean, I suppose it is much better to have a realistic worldview, because at least then the expectations can only really go one direction. Not
yeah,
expectations, the realization. If low
Ryan,
expectation.
I think that if I said 100,000 and it was quoted somewhere, I'd have to point to examples of how we got there. And I think knowing from a conventional standpoint the countries that are doing what they're trying to do, leveraging the proven technologies and methodologies and drilling practices and blah 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 blah, the timelines for projects to commercialize, um, 30,000 would be amazing. Would be amazing. It's more than doubled. I mean, we've been generating megawatts online since 1960, and so it's taken us this long to get to 16. If we can more than double in the next 10 years, it's going to be amazing. As I said, if Quays can do what they're doing, and if the 10 other versions of Quays are doing that across the energy spectrum, then maybe we will laugh at the 30,000 prediction and then be 60,000. But I really think that it comes down to more than just proving we can get to that resource, proving that we can convert coal plants or oil and gas wells, and actually doing that at scale. And what are we doing with that power, and how are we supporting the supercritical geothermal resources we'd be obtaining at
Hmm.
those depths? I think that's not a overnight conversation, or just build another 100 megawatt power plant. You
Yep.
have to build
Yep.
100 megawatt power plants to support that.
I just have a few more for you. You mentioned
Okay.
there, or at least you alluded to the fact that in a lot of developing countries, perhaps even in developing countries as well, there are just dishonest actors who move the needle that are working against, say, renewables of X, Y, and Z kind, just because the palms can be greased elsewhere. I'm currently watching this great Norwegian TV show called Likalandet, and it's brilliant because it really highlights the success of the politicians and the bureaucrats who otherwise I'd be allergic to. But they really did a great job at making sure that this natural resource was managed as best as anyone's ever managed it, really, in history, I guess. So that's a question of politics. It's a question of lobbyism. It's a question of varying interests, especially when there's big money involved. Can you talk a little bit about this? It seems like as you scale up, or I'm sure you deal with this all the time, especially if you're consulting with clients that are in other countries, you have to think about these issues. Um, you know, it would just be fascinating to hear you think out loud on them.
Sure. Let's see. I think that whether it's the term corruption, or it's lining the pockets in different ways, or it's just the current regime of government X, there are varying hurdles that are not singularly responsible for any delay. or steps backwards that have slowed down geothermal from a macro perspective for development in either developing or emerging economies. I think the ingrained mindset for um, the countries that are leaders within this world that may be considered second, third world or emerging or developing have proven that the resource is commercially viable, that there's an infrastructure that can be counted on, that it provides sustainable clean energy to a country that otherwise would have to import enormously expensive fossil fuels or other diesels and whatnot to survive. And I think that the balance of knowing that they depend on this infrastructure or can depend on the infrastructure of geothermal versus perhaps the lobbies for oil, gas, or for even solar or wind, for example, that may influence or cloud or confuse the very same energy ministers that I need to speak with to get geothermal projects on board. I think that they're trying not to talk myself in circles here. I think that there's a delicate balance between recognizing that geothermal doesn't have the numbers in people, in dollars, in lobbies to compete with solar, wind, oil, and gas and mining. They just don't. I don't lump solar, gas, oil, and mining, solar and wind, oil, and mining together. They're all in this one bucket, but they all have more money and more sophisticated lobbying firms worldwide than geothermal could ever hope for combined. Um, and so there's always going to be an uphill battle for education, for claiming those tax incentives or those government programs that will incentivize development or de-risk development that we're going to face for as long as we continue on this path worldwide. It is what it is. But I do believe, and I'm an internal optimist, that I think the proven status of geothermal in these countries, whether it's El Salvador or Costa Rica or Nicaragua as a Latin American example, or it's Indonesia for Asia Pac, that it's proven and it offsets this alternative that would be polluting the world and polluting the region, and that they see the potential, they see the value, they see infrastructure, they see jobs, they see votes, and I think that's going to move the needle enough to where we're going to see it continue to grow. How fast it grows in those regions, that's to be determined. How many times we have to re-educate the next regime or next government, that's to be determined. We're trained to expect that, and I think that's the reality that we're facing, is that it's going to be until the Quays and the others develop that amazing technology and we can harness that power and commercially develop that power. What I just described will be the reality for what we're living in.
Yeah. So for the lobbyism, for the overall brand of geothermal, for access to all the ESG money that's coming in from government perspective, geothermal needs to be proven at a deeper level so it can just scale further and it can have more impact. You think at the current level that we can drill at confidently with the current technology, it won't scale to the heights that it might then have influence over lobbies and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the science is the science from conventional geothermal is not changing, right? It's can we do it faster, cheaper, safer, deeper, like Quays is trying to do, or through alternative means like coal conversion, oil and gas conversion, and that's going to offset the conventional spike of growth. The pathway that we're growing today from a conventional standpoint, that's going to see this go up.
Yeah.
How high that goes up and at what pace is very unclear. But it may revolutionize the concept I just tried to articulate, probably poorly, about the lobbies and the balance of powers and oil and gas influence, etc. So I don't know.
Are you seeing really good talent coming into geothermal? You know, the best physicists, the best engineers. Does yeah.
I think if you would have asked that question to me 2019, I would have said no. I would have said that I was concerned for the future of geothermal, because even though my hair is grayer than it was brown, I was in this industry and had leadership positions on boards at a younger age, and the industry was a gray hair industry. It was a very 60 and over, people holding on a little too long, resistance to change, status quo kind of mentality that was a turnoff to the youth of our world to exciting opportunities and careers. And the industry was growing slowly, but there was not a lot of interest from oil and gas. There was not that pivot mentality. This is pre-pandemic. There was not a lot of movement.
Hmm.
Today, I would say yes, and I think that's largely because of what I was describing as climate change, climate action, the awareness of the future of our world that we're living in, and how we can actually help turn back the clock, or at least aid in the ability to fight climate change with careers in geothermal or careers in renewables. I think that's attracting a wave of talent across the spectrum of the industry, from sales to science and everything in between. Um, but it has been a recent phenomenon, and I think a large part of that is the pivot that we've been talking about with, the oil and gas between 2015 and 2020, and how it's just gone up and down, and people are tired of losing their jobs every 3 to 4 years, and they're looking for stability, and stability seems to be in climate change and in sustainability and blah 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 blah. So I think it's here to stay. I think that we have a wave of great young talent. I mean, my LinkedIn connections are growing every day with exciting people that have engineers next to their titles, or geophysicists next to their titles, or financial planners, et cetera, that have goals in sustainability or goals in renewables, or even better, geothermal. So I'm very hopeful and excited to see where this goes.
So cool. I couldn't. If you are a young person and you are really interested in energy, it seems like renewable energy is the only way you're going to go. How much value you're going to add to a windmill, to a solar panel. It feels like the real call to action is how much can you innovate a drill? And I wish I had a more technical degree. I'm actually looking into doing a master's now in a technical degree, so I can have some sort of conversational fluency on the technical side of things. But for me at least, and this is my own rose-colored lens, there couldn't be a more exciting industry, really, because the upside is so huge should you hit that, answer these. And what's so exciting about it is you know the questions that you need to answer, which can't be said for a lot of the big step function changes in society. They sort of serendipitously they're serendipitously tripped over. But with this particular issue, you know exactly the targets you need to meet. You know where the hot rock is. You know the different types of rock it is. You just have to drill to it. And so, yeah, it's an incredibly exciting thing. You mentioned that you have an insight into all the exciting things America is doing. I wonder if you could make a forward projection as to who the world leader for geothermal is, where the great companies are, the great innovation, the money, all the rest.
So I think that the United States, being the leading country in the world on geothermal megawatts online, will continue to be the leader in megawatts online and in innovation and in thought leadership for years to come. That being said, a lot of the conventional geothermal power in America has been developed. And so the next phase of development will be on the outskirts of that known resource, and we'll be leveraging the new technology. So it will be putting the quays and the evers and the green fires and the criterions and transitional, et cetera, to the test to leverage that forward thinking, the fervo energies, et cetera, to develop uh, lesser known and lesser proven regions to advance the U.S. megawatts online. That being said, and I've said this prior, and I think the number 2 and number 3 ranked countries, Indonesia and the Philippines, have so much untapped conventional potential that they could 10x the US if they
Wow.
fast tracked that development.
Mm.
And there are plans to be doing that. There are the Philippines Department of Energy has sent out a solicitation for a plan and a team to re-energize their development. They're one of the leaders, but they haven't actually done a lot of new development in 20 plus years. So they can quickly become 2 or 3 times as big as they are from a megawatts online. And then I've already said there's almost 30,000 megawatts in the Indonesia, and there are myriad of islands in the country that can be converted to power or can be developed into power, and that would be region changing. I mean, they could install underwater power lines and whatnot. So the U.S. has the infrastructure, has the renewable energy laboratories, has a lot of the dollars and people, thought leaders, and startups. But on an untapped potential side, I've just
Yeah.
listed them, but Asia Pac
is in Indonesia, is the politics a huge speed bump there, or is it just the sort of acidity of the ground that you mentioned earlier?
So the corrosion and scale buildup from the resource is less of a hindrance to development and more of a reason that some of the budget has to be allocated to maintain and re-drill rather than just new drills. Um, I will not pretend to understand or know the latest in Indonesian politics, but I do know that it has changed, and it's changed several times in my lifetime, and it seems to ebb and flow with wide open door to geothermal, to making it harder for geothermal, supporting fossil fuels, to embracing renewable energy. And I can't tell you why, and that's just my expertise kind of stops in front of that. But I mean, my father's been in the industry for 45 plus years on the drilling side, and he was an expat in Indonesia for 6 years. So he's shared a little bit from what he's understood, and it always seems like it always, yeah, but it does seem like it's harder than it has to be, and I don't know how to fix that or what solution needs to be put in place, but it does make it seems like it's harder than it needs to be to just get things fast
That
tracked.
country is one of the most fascinating in the world. You know, I think they're the third largest rainforest. They're the largest Muslim population. They're spread out across this archipelago. There's so many different ethnicities. China sort of runs the business side of things. It's so fascinating. If you're interested, or anyone
Yeah.
listening, Jared Diamond wrote a book called Upheaval, and he chapters Indonesia in it, and it's remarkable.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll check it out.
Thing. Look, if you're okay with it, there are a couple of questions that I would like to ask as many guests as possible. They're non-geothermal related, but if you have the time.
I'll do my best to answer them.
And before I ask them actually, I will just hand it over to you if there was something more that you feel like we didn't address that is 100% worth saying.
Just that for everything that I said was a challenge for geothermal, there's an equal or greater opportunity and excitement behind it, as you've sort of alluded to just there. It's there's an endless source of heat beneath our feet if we can get to it, and there's an enormous amount of untapped potential from a conventional standpoint that doesn't require a whole lot of innovation. It just requires the organized leadership and the right alignment of dollars and cents.
All right, Patrick, just two for you. The first, what is a country looking into the future that you're particularly bullish on?
I I will d- disqualify the U.S. just because I live here and I have a lot of insight into some of the incredibly exciting things that we're doing from a geothermal standpoint. And I will go towards, I'm toying between Latin America and Asia Pac and East Africa. I think I'm going to go with, and there's a few, but I think I'm going to go with Eastern Africa as a region, Kenya as like um, the specific leader within that region, but I have particular interest and I'm overly excited about the geothermal, and I say that in italics, the geothermal potential of Ethiopia, not um, the civil the situation from a government standpoint and overall safety, but the geothermal potential of Ethiopia could catapult themselves into energy independence and geothermal thought leadership, and follow quickly behind Kenya, which is setting the pace, setting the standard for geothermal generation.
Finally, Patrick, this is my favorite question. If you could listen to witness a conversation between any two people of history, dead or alive, no language barrier, who would you listen to? Who would you listen as a podcast? These two people.
I think this might be influenced from a date that just passed, but I would love to listen to Barack Obama interview Jackie Robinson,
Remind me who Jackie Robinson is.
the first professional African American baseball player in
Okay.
the U.S.
Are you a big
who
baseball
went
fan?
through. I mean, I've got kids playing baseball. I am a baseball fan, but I think from a civil rights standpoint, the first black president in the U.S. interviewing the first black baseball player in America, and kind of sharing that sort of title of being one of the first in a country that is still a bit polarized on that topic. Um, and then just being in general, just a fan of sports, and I know former President Barack Obama is a sports fan himself,
Mm.
and it was Jackie Robinson Day just a couple days ago, so it's present in my mind, and so I think that would be a fascinating discussion on civil rights and on the hurdles they overcame to become the leaders that they were and they are.
Cool. No, absolutely. Barack is one of the greatest speakers I have ever heard, alongside
Yeah,
Christopher Hitchens. Just someone who can like really, really deliver a point. Terrific
yeah,
sales, which I
yeah,
guess a good politician is at the end of the day.
yeah.
Well, Patrick, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for that. I think I
Likewise, Ryan.
achieved the goal to get your worldview on geothermal, though I'm sure there is a lot more. And when I am
Yeah.
a little bit more literate in it, I think we should, well, I'll follow up.
I think, like I said, I think a year or two from now, it's going to be mind blowing how different it looks with some of these startups actually being mature companies now and
Yeah.
megawatts online. So I'd love to revisit this in a
Amazing.
bit.
Well, thank you again, Patrick, for that. Really, really exciting to speak with you. And again, I just want to make this general appeal to anyone listening. If you're involved in geothermal, reach out. I would absolutely love to hear from you. I have lined up several more guests actually to be coming on in the next few weeks who are working in the different parts of the geothermal industry, from the investors that are providing the money to do it, to explain the limitations of investing in geothermal, the fact that you're working on 10, 15-year time horizons and all the sort of structural limitations that come to investment, then to the actual engineers, what is required, what are the drilling innovations that they need to be able to go further deep, and so much more as well. I'm incredibly excited and passionate about geothermal, and so I am just making this appeal out to anyone as well who might still be listening. Again, get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. Finally, my ambition for this podcast. So, as you've heard before, I don't want to be too redundant. So, this is assuming this is the first time you've listened to this podcast. Hello. What my aim is with this podcast, as you might have seen, we're almost 100 episodes in, and this episode is about geothermal. But as you will go through the list, it is a wide range of eclectic curiosities, and they're all a reflection of my own interests and curiosities. But my hope is that I can somehow corner the podcast market for eclectic curiosities in whatever market it is you're listening in from, whatever country you're listening in from. So how does one actually achieve that goal? Unfortunately, all the podcast algorithms are completely in the stone age. They're very unsophisticated when it comes to the nodes and variables that they interact with. At the moment, it's one thing. It's the amount of reviews that a podcast has. So on Spotify, you can give it a quick 5 stars. On Apple, you can give it a quick 5 stars and a comment. But really, that is the best and most helpful thing you could possibly do for me to help me realize my goal, or at least my ambition for this podcast, which is to corner the podcast market for eclectic curiosities in whatever country it is you're listening in from. And if you're still listening in now after this giant appeal, I just want to nail home one more time. If you're working in geothermal energy, I would be thrilled to hear from you. Thank you again, Patrick Hanson. Very generous with your time, very generous with your responses. It was a thrill and a pleasure to speak with you. And thank you as well to you, my dear listener. See you next week.